Hello there, this is Yanas Makula for W+9 and thank you for joining me today. In this video, I'll talk about adding texture and dimension to one-layer cards with the help of a tool you probably already have. I myself rarely make one-layer cards as I always want to add something to them. But with this trick, I think I might actually start creating one-layer projects a lot more often, and if you're like me, I hope you will too. Before we get to the trick part, I actually need to go ahead and stamp something for my cards. I'm going to be using the Fresh Cut Wreath stamp set today, and I'm going to stamp 4 cards in total, just so that I can try various color combinations and so that I do different sentiments and basically have cards for different occasions. I'm not going to focus on stamping part much as there's nothing special to it this time, but I will show you the process real quick. So I'm using my Mini Misty stamp positioner today, and I've already prepared 4 panels that are cut to 4¼ by 5½ inches. And you can actually skip using panels and just go ahead and do the stamping on a card base directly, but I prefer to stamp on a panel and then adhere it onto a card base. I also did some test stamping beforehand, and to figure out how to align these images, I printed a stamping guide from the W+9 website. It's very helpful. I've already placed my panel inside my Mini Misty, and I have the foliage of the round wreath placed in the center, and I'm going to start my stamping. I'm going to use a few colors of ink, and I'm using Last Leaf, and I'm double stamping my images. You don't need to double stamp these, they do stamp perfectly the first time, but since I already have the stamp in the Misty, I might as well go ahead and double stamp it. It's just a habit these days. Things just have to be double stamped. For my second panel, I'm using Appletini ink. For the third one, I'm stamping with Mojito, and I'm cleaning my stamps when I change colors. I'm just not showing that on video. The last color of ink that I'm going to use to stamp the leaves is a very light gray color, Fairy Dust, and I really like it. It is perfect for very soft projects, and it goes well with pretty much any other color out there. Next, I'm going to stamp the flowers, and again, I'm using a variety of ink colors. I'm starting with Hayride, and I have the leaves stamped in Last Leaf here. Next, using Wild Mango, and the leaves are stamped in Mojito. Then I'm using Miami Spice, and the leaves are stamped in Appletini ink. And again, using Miami Spice for the last panel, where the leaves are stamped in Fairy Dust. So I kept on stamping these images, and there are additional layers to these flowers, and also filler images, which I actually forgot all about and added at the very last moment. But other than the colors I already mentioned, I also used Sweet Nectar and black inks. I also used my Misty to stamp these sentiments, and I first stamped Hello on all of these. The Hello is from the hand-lettered Hello stamp set, and to mix things up, I added various additional sentiments, such as Sweet Friend, Beautiful, Gorgeous, and Sunshine. In case you're wondering, it took me about 25 minutes to stamp these 4 panels. Now, you can by all means leave those as is and use on cards, but like I mentioned, this video is all about adding texture and dimension to your one-layer cards. And one way to add texture and dimension is by using embossing, by dry embossing your cardstock. You can use an embossing folder for this, but for one-layer cards, I feel that embossing folders just add a bit too much dimension. Plus, I want the embossing to match to my stamped design, and this can be done by creating your own embossing plate. For this, you will need a die-cutting machine, embossing mat, and a die. Here I have a piece of cardstock, and this is a half of a letter sheet, so larger than my stamped panel, and I'm going to use the Hello die, the hand-lettered Hello, to create my embossing plate. In order to space everything out evenly, I'm going to create grid lines going diagonally on my cardstock to help me align the die. Usually I would use a pencil instead of a pen, but I'm using a pen here so that the lines are visible on the video, and I would also use a ruler instead of a clear block. But again, my desk is a mess and I can't find a ruler, so I'm using what I have, and in my case, it's a clear block with grid lines. And I'm also going to add vertical lines to this piece, again to help me align my die a little better. Now, you don't have to do this, you can eyeball the placement of the die, and I've done that in the past, but I prefer to add these grid lines. So the next part is to actually die cut the design in this cardstock panel. This is a little time consuming, but this embossing plate that we're making can be used many different times. It's not a one-time use thing. I forgot to mention that for this you will need to use cardstock, not paper, but cardstock and thick cardstock. You don't want to use anything that you won't die cut, but not thin paper either. The thicker the cardstock you use, the deeper the embossing the impression is going to be. But again, don't use anything too thick, as you might have difficulty die cutting it. In the past, I did this differently, and it would involve an additional step that took longer to complete, and it required additional supplies too. But I've gotten smarter this time, and I'm just creating a panel with a bunch of negative die cutting. In the past, I would die cut these images and would adhere them, the positive images, onto another panel and would use that as an embossing plate. But this method, the method I'm showing you in this video, is actually much faster. So I like to start in the middle of my panel and work my way out. And I'm also paying attention to the grid lines and aligning the die following those grid lines every time, so that the design is a little bit more symmetrical, I guess. So now let's move on to the embossing part. First of all, because we die cut a word, we need to be very careful when we are building our sandwich for embossing to make sure we emboss this hello the right way. And believe me, I've messed this up a couple of times. You need to build your sandwich depending on whether you want the hello word embossed, so raised above everything else, or debossed. I want mine embossed, so I've done some test embossing to show you the difference. Here I have it embossed incorrectly. It's actually debossed into the paper and everything else is raised. So this was debossed and I want it embossed on my cards. So the way you need to build your sandwich is this way. Place the stamped piece front side up behind the die cut panel. Make sure the die cut panel is also facing the front side up. And then flip it and place onto the plate of your die cutting machine. So the front of everything is now facing down. Now for embossing, you're going to need an embossing mat. This is a tan embossing mat from Spellbinders. Now this mat comes with this die cutting machine. This is a platinum from Spellbinders. And embossing mats come with all of the Spellbinders machines. Now I'm not sure about other machines as I never use them, but I do know that this embossing mat can be purchased separately. And it doesn't cost much and you can use it to emboss with your dies. So it's a good tool to have in your stash. To emboss this, you need to follow the embossing sandwich for your die cutting machine, and you can find that information on your die cutting machine manual. For platinum machine, you just need to place the tan embossing mat and the embossing plate onto the paper that already sits on the base platform and center the machine to emboss. And let's go ahead and take a look at our panel. It worked beautifully. I'm going to tilt this in the light so you can see it a little better. I have my stamped wreath, my sentiment, and my embossing that matches my sentiment. I think it looks absolutely awesome. I'm going to go ahead and continue embossing my stamped panels to emboss all 4 of them. And here they are, instant texture on cards. I really love this look. After my embossing was done, I adhered my panels onto A2 top folding card bases. And the reason I didn't stamp directly onto the card base is because I would have also had embossing on the inside of the card, and I didn't want that. I wanted the inside of the cards to be flat. I also embellished my cards with sequins and beads, and I added a touch of gold glitter to the centers of the filler flowers, which I remembered to stamp only after I embossed my panels. And it wasn't a big deal. I was able to stamp these no problem since they were very small images and the embossing wasn't very deep. But it's best to first stamp everything and then emboss to add a texture to your paper. Here's a closer look at all of these one-layer cards with some extra texture and dimension. I hope you like this idea and I hope you'll give it a try. Thank you so much for joining me today. Be sure to check out W+9 for more creative inspiration. See you next time. Bye!